Good morning to everybody in Asia Pacific, and it's nighttime here in New York. There is 12 hours difference with Kuala Lumpur, so you can figure out what it is in relation to New York from where you are. I am absolutely thrilled to think that this is happening tonight, that here we are with 43 participants on a Zoom call, talking, me from New York, talking to you in Asia Pacific in a moment when the world is in global shutdown and we're all obeying stay-at-home orders. Isn't this something marvelous to think that here we are, and when we had all the opportunities to travel and all the rest of it, we didn't manage this kind of meeting. Well, I did once or twice, I think in my 12 going on 13 years here in New York. So I'm very happy to share with you some ideas and perspectives and approaches with regard to migration. And Teresa mentioned something about, you know, how do we do justice? Look, relax about it. You're doing justice every day in terms of the ministry you're in your walking with people, in your knowing what's going on, and in your availability to be of service to the congregation. And even at this moment, you're doing justice by seeking to know more about migration. So I congratulate you all, and I'm delighted to be with you. So now we will stop looking, or I'll stop looking at the different faces, and we'll put on the PowerPoint so that you're able to follow more easily. And if I'm going too fast, maybe I heard that Veronique is there, a co-host. Maybe you can send her a message, and she will tell Teresa to slow me down or something like that.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Let me get to the.
Go to the beginning. Yes.
Yes, the beginning.
Yes. Yes. So when we, you can put on, you can move to the next.
Okay.
Yeah. So when Teresa asked me about sharing the migration papers, she outlined what the purpose might be. And I think it's very helpful to see and to know what we're about during this time. So first of all, we're going to unpack this position paper on migration. We're going to take it apart and look at different elements in it so that we can be led to a deeper understanding of what are the systems and structures that prevent migrants from entering into inclusive, holistic societies with benefits and with care and in an inclusive manner. So looking at some of that, and then all of that then a kind of to say, okay, I will take it home to my province, my ministry, and I look and see how are we doing in relation to what I hear. So that's some of the purpose of what we're about this evening. So with the introduction, I went to the opening words of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, because in some senses, much of what we're doing these days actually focuses there. And the opening words say, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights for all members of the human family. And I love the way that that's written, all members of the human family. And this also then is the foundation for Good Shepherd position paper on migration. Good Shepherd ministries and advocacy on behalf of migrants, because they are members of the human family and they have inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights. So again, the inherent dignity of the person, which I've just outlined for you from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, is a central value of all faith traditions. And I say that because we're coming from multi-faith traditions throughout Asia, which I was privileged to experience some 40 years ago. Who would believe it? 40 years ago since I first set my foot in Asia into the Philippines. And it's this is at the core of UN work and the UN document, a new document in terms of a global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So again, the inherent dignity. So just an overview with regard to, and this is very brief, with regard to work on migration. Now, you're all familiar with, and I think there's good visibility of the IOM, the International Organization for Migrants throughout Asia. And that started very soon after the creation of the United Nations. It began in 1951, and it has evolved over the years. I just said evolved. You can research it if you're interested. And now, and it was part of my privileged time at the United Nations to be present when the IOM actually became an agency of the United Nations in 2016. Up until that, they were an agency that worked for migrants outside of the United Nations. And in fact, migrants were hardly spoken of in the United Nations. But this all changed in 2014, 2015, up to 2015, when we were negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals. And certain NGOs were there present, and they were advocating for the rights of migrants. And this is particularly in Goal 10, which looks at inequality. And Target 7 is the particular target that is referenced. And Target 10 says, Target 7, 10.7, says that the addressing inequality, that in doing that, we will have some sorts of processes that facilitate orderly, safe, and responsible migration and mobilities of people. So orderly, safe, and responsible migration and mobilities of people, including through implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. Now, it's for the governments to actually develop these policies. Well-planned, well-managed migration policies. And the attempt to do that after the Sustainable Development Goals was actually a process that took from 2015 right up to 2018, when the Global Compact on Migration was actually negotiated and adopted. And I mention it there as a historic change at global level, with United Nations member states coming together to finalize 2 global compacts. But the one that we're interested in this evening is the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. And you see, it even took the title from 10.7, Sustainable Goals, 10 in inequality, and 0.7 had to do with safe, orderly, and regular migration. And this was adopted in Marrakesh in 2018, in December. Now, I was not present. I would have liked to have been there, but only one can go. Cecily from the office went at that stage and attended that conference. And the other then Global Compact was a compact on refugees. And this was earlier agreed in Geneva, because refugees have a convention coming also from 1951. They have their own convention, but migrants had nothing. So this was a big moment in the history of the addressing the issues of migration at the United Nations. And I just wanted to, you have the website there, the link, you'll get the PowerPoint, so you can go back at your own leisure and get the full document. But and this is just a page of a document, but I pulled out these parts of it to show you that the Global Compact has to do with protecting the human rights of all migrants. And we say we operate human rights-based frameworks for all our ministries based on human rights. So protecting the human rights of all migrants. Governments have pledged to do that. They have pledged to reduce forced migration. So why are people forced to move? What drives people to leave their country of birth? So they're asked to address, reduce those reasons within the country of origin, to improve migration management, both within the country and between countries, and to enhance the safety of migration. And so to make it a safe experience, because it is a right of everybody to move, to have freedom of movement. That's a right. Yes, there must be laws in place in countries to say how you come in, for what reason you come in, but they shouldn't in any sense infringe on your human rights. Sorry, am I breaking up for people? No?
No, you're still all right.
Okay. So those four aspects were given expression in objectives. And in all, there were 23 objectives. And I have put summarized them together there under the different headings. We're not going to go there just at the moment. Yes, yes, you can see there the objectives 6, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18. And just for your own information, at the very end of the PowerPoint, we won't do it tonight, you will be able to read what the objective is. And you will get a link that will also give you the link to the Global Compact. Okay, so next slide. Now we're moving from the Global Compact, which is the newest document in terms of policy and good practice for migration. And I found it interesting that, like, the World Migration Report for 2020 has been published. And again, the website is there, and it's done by the IOM, and it's a very informative document. It's very big, as all these documents are, but what I do is I look at the index and see, is there anything that attracts you in a chapter? And if you get 1 point from any of these reports, you take it because it's of interest to you, and you let the rest of it go. You couldn't sit down to read 200 pages or whatever, and it's dense and it's all statistics. But what I did want to point out to you is that if you look, you will see that Asia is divided up into Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, Eastern Asia, and Central Asia. So when we come to look at Asia and Asia Pacific, it's not all the same. There are different characteristics in the different regions. And if you want to see what those are, I gave you the pages there to look at. I thought that might help to bring the report home to you in terms of your particular region. The next reference I'm making is a document that, and I do this often, I sign on to documents. Groups prepare it. It comes into my office. I read it and I say, oh, this is a very good document. Of course, Good Shepherd agreed to this. I don't always have the opportunity to share with people what I have signed on in terms of saying, yes, we agree this is a good document. And it came from the Scalabrini fathers and a bigger group of civil society people. Now, Good Shepherd were not involved in the writing of it. It actually came in my email. But the Scalabrini fathers, you might know them in Asia. They are very upfront and very much engaged at policy and service delivery for migrants. And the document was in the was situated in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and what they saw happening to migrants throughout the world in terms of they being outside of services that were necessary in terms of public health, and also being in informal jobs where they lost their employment, and also living in very cramped conditions, which was very conducive to transmitting the disease from one person to another. So it was in that context that they said, we have to do something about this as a civil society group. And the first thing we have to do is save lives first. And that's the heading of the document. And so they're outlining the vulnerabilities that I've said to you there. And they are emphasizing that it is a new moment of a new solidarity with migrants and refugees. And I think it's significant that we are looking at the migration paper at this moment in history. And the document calls on governments to adopt an inclusive, non-discriminatory approach. So inclusive, whatever is available for people in the country should be available to migrants and refugees. Inclusive, non-discriminatory. If it's for people, it's for everyone. Such an approach must make migrants and refugee safety, health, and well-being a primary concern, while recognizing the role of that migrants play as frontline workers in facing the crisis. And I was saying to Teresa here in New York, migrants are really the frontline workers. They are the people who are doing delivery. They are the people who are in the takeout restaurants. They are the people who are in the postal service delivering. They are the people who are actually the doctors and nurses in the hospitals. So if anything, if their safety and health and well-being isn't of primary concern, then we will have no services at all. Everything will stop, because they are the frontline workers. And sometimes we think that migrants are a burden on the country, but we don't always have the opportunity to look to see what migrants contribute to the country. What service do they give? And how unjustly they are treated in terms of conditions of work and in terms of remuneration, in terms of access to health, education, etc. So this is, in summary, what this document is trying to get at. And it's, the next slide there, Teresa, please. It calls then for us to partner with migrants and refugees themselves in finding solutions. It's not that we are to find the solutions and tell them or give them the solution. We partner with them to find the solution. And the document calls for this being a moment to implement the Global Compact on Migration. And throughout the document, the Global Compact, there are references to disaster preparedness in all of our countries, whether it's due to fire or hurricane or tsunami or storm or whatever. And migrants should be part of those plans. They shouldn't be excluded. And again, the point about refugees and migrants need access to healthcare without fear of potential negative consequences from immigration officials. For example, fear of being detained or of being deported, etc. They should be able to have their health looked after without any of those concerns. So turning from that document, I thought it would be good to actually recognize that there are 272 million migrants in the world today. And a migrant is somebody not living in their country of birth for whatever reason. And the report is saying there hasn't been such a great rise in terms of the numbers in relation to the population of the world. But there are 30%, together 31% of migrants are found throughout Asia, 84 million, and 30% in Europe, roughly 82 million, and North America then with 59 million, and Africa, Latin America, and Oceania having lesser numbers. So you in Asia are in the heart of the issue of migration. You're living with the biggest numbers. And it notes that China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are the most populous countries. And we're distinguishing now from international migrants and migrant workers, because many people migrate for many reasons. But the group that we're concerned with, I think mostly, is the migrant worker. And usually then it's the migrant worker who is in informal employment or in precarious employment. So this is just gives you an overview globally of the numbers. And then the next slide actually shows you the ratio of male to female. And I like this particular slide because, as you can see, 52% are male, but 48% are female. And you have all the ages up along. So while the biggest majority are working people, you can see that there are children and that there are older people. And as I prepared this, I wondered whether we in any of our ministries have concern for older migrants, or what difficulties do they meet, or what challenges do they face. For example, if you look at people who are 70 to 74 years of age, actually there's more women migrants than there are men migrants at that age. But then women live longer. Then you go back down to 0 to 4 years, and it's more or less the same, boys and girls. So it's interesting, but that shows you that you have to look at migration really across the life cycle, from birth to old age. So we're turning now from some of the background with regard to migration to look at the migration paper itself. If you have it in front of you, it's 2 sheets. It seems simple, like, you know, to say, oh, it's only 2 sheets to read, but it's actually hard reading. And it's in 2 parts. The first page is more or less what I call setting the scene, paragraphs 1 to 5. And the second page, it begins at the bottom of page 1 and goes over into the second page, is actually responses to migration. So paragraph 1 is more or less saying migration is a global phenomenon. And it's one of the crises of our times. And actually, the climate change is a crisis of our time. And here we are with a new crisis in terms of the COVID and the whole issue around health. Paragraph 2 says, yes, there are some positive aspects. And I just named one from my experience here in terms of migrants are at the front line in terms of the delivery of services. But it's often amid a sea of negatives. We don't want them, they're criminals, they're criminalized, they're detained, they're targeted, they're discriminated against, a sea of negatives. And discrimination is an added factor. And number 4 then brings us back to the very beginning. All migrants are rights holders. And in the Judeo-Christian spiritual foundation, we have this invitation to welcome the stranger in the same way as we would welcome God among us. So that's it in summary. It's nice to think it can be as short as that, but we'll look at it in a bit more detail. And the next one is filling out paragraph 2, which looks at the drivers or the root causes. Sometimes I think we're more familiar with the word root causes, but the word driver is being used in much of the language today. The drivers, and I'm saying the dangers in the migration process. So some of the drivers are listed there. I'm sure you can identify with almost all of them in terms of your experience: poverty, food insecurity, drought, famine, degraded environment, climate change, climate displacement, natural disasters, armed conflict. Some of that is in the Philippines. I don't know what other countries would be experiencing armed conflict at the moment in Asia. Desperation, people desperate to eke out a living, to want a better life for their children. Inhuman labor conditions where they're living, human rights violations. And then often a driver is an ineffectual government, that a government that's not coping, that's not managing the issues of the country. So these are the drivers. And then the dangers: it can be a perilous and traumatic journey, particularly if you're crossing seas, yes, crossing borders. I think of what we saw in terms of Europe and the movement of peoples into Europe and how they were left in boats and sinking and drowning, all the rest of it. They experienced grave risks on the way, walking, hunger, being attacked, women and girls in particular being raped, etc. They're confronted by smugglers. And very often, the migrants who had nothing pay sums of money to smugglers to get them safely to the next country. Terrorists, oftentimes they're trafficked en route, tricked. They might be offered to get you across the border, and then women and young girls find themselves, sorry now, that's my alarm system going off. Hopefully it'll close down soon. So they encounter abusive job recruiters and employers, corrupt governments, and corrupt systems and corrupt officials paying bribes here and there. They can face severe restrictions in movement, in access to work, in access to school, healthcare services, as we've mentioned, and other services, including social protection. I think I didn't bring that in here maybe sufficiently, but I'll mention it. Social protection is a right. They often face confinement in detention facilities. Girls and women and children even face more hazards in terms of personal safety and the whole idea, the danger of being raped. And women are also, we have to take account of in this, in the sending country, that women are sometimes left at home and are bereft without protection and income. So that's another group. I don't know, it would be interesting to hear what experience you have of those. So that's the drivers and the dangers. The movements of people today include, and this is where I was saying you have international migration and numbers, and then you have migrants who move for work. But you also have temporary workers, refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons. They're another group. And sometimes people who are stateless. I think there are some groups throughout Asia that are in that group of being stateless. They don't belong anywhere. They might be able to get asylum someplace and then they want to send them back home. So movement of people. And this is made difficult, and this is where looking for regular and streamlining migration would be a great help, because each is defined under separate legal frameworks in national and international law. So it becomes very complex. Yet all are entitled to move in safety and dignity. So that's the bottom line. We're saying that the system, the legal frameworks is very fragmented, is complex, different laws in different places, etc. But at the same time, everybody is entitled and has a right to safety and dignity in their moving. Categorizations. This is again a part of paragraph 3, but I think we have to be aware of it. Oftentimes migrants are the object of suspicion and xenophobia. They face complex bureaucratic barriers to support an inclusion. Situations can be ambiguous and overlapping. Are they somebody that was smuggled? Are they a migrant who was trafficked? So you have these kinds of complex situations. Are they a migrant who was stateless? Are they somebody who was smuggled and has no papers? So you have all these complexities around the issue of migration. And discriminations then can be due to gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, illness, age. So you have all these factors coming together. So the principles then in paragraph 4, we have, I think, repeated several times, everybody is a rights holder and protection is a moral imperative. That's on us and on governments to protect. We have to look to the integrity of the family, the rights of children, and many of us work with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have to be careful that people who are migrants are not labelled criminals. There's challenging barriers in terms of human and labour rights, which often exploit people who are migrant, who are informal workers. We have to reject xenophobia, and we recognise that oftentimes covenants and treaties are there at the international level, but we have to seek for them to be ratified and implemented at national level. International treaties, agreements are no use unless they actually come down to the national level. And then paragraph 5 says, we welcome the migrant. We've said that. We honour their particular culture and heritage. They're different to us. They have different experiences. So we have to honour that. We have to celebrate their positive contribution. And I think part of it is in many cities, and here in New York, we go out at 7 o'clock in the evening to clap all of the workers who are working on our behalf, and the rest of us staying at home. So this is one moment in terms of giving positive contribution, but we need to do more than clapping. Service needs are complex and extensive. Sometimes language skills, access to healthcare, social integration, trauma healing, employment skills, legal help. You can see we have a lot of emergencies in New York City. Anyway, that's quite now. So all of these are demands that are made of us if we are to be relevant to the migrant. And if we are, and I find this a very important line, to facilitate self-empowered social participation. That means that they are included and that they are engaged and that we help them to be empowered to do their own social participation, but through our help, not for them, but with them, and then giving the leadership. So the last part then of, are we all right for time, Teresa?
Yes, we are.
Okay. The last part then of this tries to bring together page 2 of the migration position paper and link it with some of the objectives from the Global Compact on Migration. And I'm taking very broad sweeps in terms of this. So the 7 sub-paragraphs of paragraph 6, A to K, are a listing of essential knowledge and actions that are key to upholding a human rights approach within Good Shepherd ministries and advocacy. So that's what I think this is about. It's a listing of essential knowledge and actions. They mirror, in many instances, the 25 objectives from paragraph 16 of the Global Compact on Migration. And if you want to do a bit of research yourself on that, as I said, the 25 objectives are at the end of the PowerPoint. I didn't go into them in terms of presenting them. And what's important to know is each objective has a commitment. And that's followed by a range of actions at policy level and best practice. So if you want to know what a good practice might be, it might be good to glance down through those to see, are you doing it already, or is it something that you need to introduce? You'd look at the objective itself and see what it says, and then look at the different points in terms of the range of actions. So I took one here, and I'm referring to country of origin. And it has to do with objective 2, which says minimize the adverse drivers of structural factors that compel people to leave their country of origin. So, and the Holy See to the United Nations had a side event during the negotiations was the right to stay at home. And I thought it was a very good argument, because if conditions were right at home, people wouldn't want to leave, or they wouldn't want to leave in the same numbers that they're leaving. So the right to stay at home, and those rights, if you like, to stay at home are what the Sustainable Development Goals are about. And you can see I put the Sustainable Development Goals, the ring there, and I put the woman in the center in terms of the gender dimension. So we're talking about ending poverty, violence, sexual violence, having food security, access to health, education, decent work, gender equality, climate change mitigation, safe cities, peaceful societies, ending inequality, having partnerships. And there might be a few more: sustainable consumption and production. You get to know the goals, but they're all focused at a sustainable way of living within a country. So the country of origin, if they were implementing their Sustainable Development Goals, they might actually be addressing the drivers of migration. Secondly, the nature of work with migrant populations. We'll go back to the blue one first, I think. Oh no, sorry, you're right, country of origin. The nature of work with migrant populations, the red one, yes. We have to be aware of intersectionality. And this is a big word around the United Nations and in documents. And to try and explain it to you, for example, if somebody is half Muslim, half Hindu, a woman of color with disabilities who has been trafficked. And you could add on a few other things that would make the life of that particular migrant very difficult. Muslim, Hindu, woman of color, disabilities, trafficked. Where do you start? So that whole idea of intersectionality, and when you're doing a social history, exploring all of that, because it impinges the person and impacts the person. And then having a life cycle approach, I think I've mentioned that to you, but here I want to link it with child migrants, those who come with parents and those who are unaccompanied, those who are exploited in child labor. And how can you use the Convention on the Rights of the Child to address those issues? Again, I gave you a link there, but you probably know it, a simplified version of the rights of the child. Moving then to a gendered dimension, where we have to do gender analysis and looking at some of the issues from the CEDAW perspective and bringing the human rights violations of women and girls to the attention of CEDAW. And then the whole awareness of human trafficking and smuggling, but it's mostly the human trafficking one that I would be aware of more than the smuggling among the migrant population. And in December of this year, there will be a new moment when the Palermo Protocol, the protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, will be inviting every country to implement what it's doing. So we will have opportunities to speak there on behalf of migrant women and girls and what's happening to them. Here, I took another example, taking objective 3 and linking it with C and D of the position paper. So the objective says to provide accurate and timely information at all stages of migration. And we're invited to help people access their rights. But to help them to access their rights, we have to know them. And sometimes those rights aren't there. But the objective says that we are to, now I'm talking governments, are to provide newly arrived migrants with targeted, gender-sensitive, child-sensitive, accessible and comprehensive information. Now, does that exist in any government, in any of your countries? And if it doesn't, well then, would you be trying to ask governments, have they heard of the Global Compact? Have they read it? Do they study it? So including on compliance with national laws and local laws. So you also tell them this is the law of the country here. But that law should not infringe their rights. How to get work permits, status adjustments, registration with authorities, how to file a complaint if seeking justice about a human rights violation, as well as access to basic services. So that's packed. But in C and D in our position paper, it's saying we would take these actions. But do we know what a good example would be? It's summed up here. So how do we find that put together in our particular government? So that's that one. And then I think this is more the last slide. We have to have a multi-pronged approach. So we need to work holistically, have an integrated and collaborative approach in our units and across borders, among ourselves and with others, in both service provision, in reporting, and in doing advocacy. And sometimes they talk about a whole of government, whole of society approach. And I thought twice whether to put this in or not, but it's a good concept to think about, a whole of government approach. It's not just a ministry or a room in some government office that deals with migrants. The whole issue of migration and the needs of migrants should be in the health department, it should be in the labor department, it should be in the educational department. It should be across the whole of government. It should be streamlined. It's like the gender equality. It should be streamlined. It shouldn't be isolated. And a whole of society approach. If we provide services, we provide it for everybody in the society living in the country. So we don't distinguish and say, oh, well, this is only for the citizen, and this is for the migrant, and the migrant can't have that. It's not like, it should be a whole of government, whole of society approach. And then I just thought I would put in these last few points with regard to advocacy with governments. Oftentimes, best advocacy is done through personal influence. And I mean by knowing who your government officials are, who your local government officials are, who are concerned about these issues, talking to them, passing them the information, engaging them in conversation. It can become more formal in terms of written suggestions, asking questions, meeting with government officials more formally. Of course, it can be in demonstrations, etc., etc. That's another whole area. But like I like to highlight the role of personal influence in our work, where we're trying to advocate for human rights. And then the other point, and this is in our position paper, that we work for long-term solutions. So the work you're doing today, the advocacy on behalf of migrants, it might be only in 10 years we'll see the result. But we work for long-term solutions, not the quick fix. Yes, we will get a quick fix for this person or that person or the other person. But if we're really trying to change structures and systems, we have to take a long-term view. Seek changes in systems and structures that discriminate. And I feel that the Global Compact on Migration gives us an excellent framework to do this, both in terms of personal influence, first of all informing ourselves, then influencing other people as to what's in that document, getting them enthused about it, and getting the changes to come about. It was my pleasure and my honor to be the presenter of this evening's historic webinar from New York to Asia Pacific via Rome. So, I mean, I think it's marvelous. Who knows what other countries people were in? I think it's marvelous. I would like to pay tribute to you, Teresa, for initiating it, for your great leadership in terms of Asia Pacific, but also your collaboration with me in terms of the Justice Peace Office, and kind of now and then we kind of have little catch-up moments. So thank you for your leadership and your support. And just to say that, like, if anybody has a question that comes to you after this, everybody has my email. Just write the question. I will try to answer it. If I find anything more on any of the questions that I got this evening, I'll send the information to you, Teresa. I might have some of the names down actually that asked the questions. Maybe I have, that I would reply. So again, thank you very much to everybody. My pleasure and my privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Winifred. And on behalf of everyone gathered here, we want to thank you for your time. And we want to thank you for sharing your expertise and your years of experience doing advocacy on behalf of the congregation. And we also take this moment to thank you very much for being the main NGO representative for Good Shepherd. We know it's not an easy journey. There have been moments of frustration, but we just hope that the moments of joy would outweigh the moments of challenges. And thank you for representing the congregation.